is Waiver Wire time. Welcome, everybody, to your Tuesday edition of Fantasy Football Today on CBS Sports Network. We're presented by BetMGM, the sportsbook born in Vegas. It is a tough week to set lineups. We have 2 of the top 4 quarterbacks on a bye. We have 3 of the top 5 running backs on a bye. We have 3 of the top 6 wide receivers in total points in PPR on a bye, which was surprising to me that Garrett Wilson and Drake London are top 6 wide receivers in total points. But it is a tough week. We are here to help. What's up, Dave? I didn't get to speak to you earlier today on the podcast. How you feeling, buddy?
I'm doing great. Thanks for asking. Ready to attack week 12 with reckless abandon.
Yes.
Yes.
And Jamie, I already spoke to Jamie a lot today. He's still good?
Just move on. Just move on. Just move on.
Like the Jets.
I don't get that reference.
They fired their GM.
Yeah, that I get, but just move on. Yeah, they are moving on. All right, we got our 4 big topics. Let's start with a reaction to Monday Night Football, and Houston gets the win on the road against the Dallas Cowboys. Jamie, give me an initial reaction here on Houston and Dallas.
Cowboys stink.
Just move on.
Just move on.
Just move on.
Look, it was tough that Nico Collins didn't get the touchdown. You know, we would have liked that for him and like that for C.J. Stroud. Joe Mixon has become just an absolute stud. Competing to be the number 1 running back for the season. And I think you just kind of know what you're getting with the, secondary parts. Tank Dell's going to be more of a number 3 receiver moving forward as opposed to a number 2 option. It was good to see CeeDee Lamb perform like he did. You know, he's going to get targets, to see the numbers come through. You know, you like to get that result. But at some point you have to wonder, is he going to shut it down also? Because he looks frustrated right now also. And just this offense is a disaster as a whole.
Rank these problems for the Dallas Cowboys. Quarterback issue rest of season, coaching issue moving forward, stadium issue, roof is falling apart. I mean, when it rains, it pours on poor Jerry Jones. I don't know why I used the word poor for him there. Though Jamie said it, the only guy that you can really feel decent about for the Cowboys is CeeDee Lamb, and you just have to hope that he gets double-digit targets every single week because it's gross. He doesn't have a lot of downfield throws. Not a lot of touchdown opportunities.
And the protection's about to fall apart because the offensive line was
Yes,
really
that's another huge deal. And they might eventually go to Trey Lance, and I don't know if that's an upgrade over Cooper Rush or not.
Look, Cooper Rush wasn't that bad yesterday. I mean, I know he had the long touchdown to Tolbert, or to Turpin, rather, but he threw for 354 yards. He threw over 50 passes.
Sure.
But I think, looking in super flex leagues, I would rather have him than Tommy DeVito. I would rather.
Sure.
I think he might be better than Bryce Young. I don't think Cooper Rush is that bad. I think he's serviceable.
I'd rather have DeVito. Yeah. I'd rather have Bryce Young. They're
just because they're going to play maybe.
Yeah, I mean, Cooper Rush, like you said, he may get benched, for Trey Lance, and with the offensive line being what it is, first off, just go week by week. This Washington game is not going to be easy for them. They're 10-point underdogs, and you're talking about Dan Quinn going back to face his former team, coming off of a loss. Like they're gonna destroy the Cowboys here. So. The schedule for Bryce Young's better. The schedule for Tommy DeVito is fantastic. So I'll take those 2 guys over Cooper Rush right now.
Yeah, well, obviously.
What a debate, by the way. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Tommy DeVito versus Bryce Young versus Cooper Rush. You've got your fantasy analysis nailed.
Well, we could also talk about Luke Schoonmaker, Jatavian Sanders, and Theo Johnson.
That's coming up later in the show. Who's got more?
I don't want to spoil the best part of the show. We also have Who Has More coming up next. Listen, we're running out of time to make trades in a lot of leagues, so it's time for our favorite buy lows and our favorite sell highs. Dave, who's your favorite buy low?
My favorite buy low is Bucky Irving, who didn't even play last week. He's a running back in Tampa. Love the schedule coming up for him. I think it's going to pan out well. He has more carries than Rachaad White on the season and in each of the past 3 games. Leads Tampa Bay in rushing yards, rushing touchdowns. Only 4 fewer catches than Rachaad White over their last 4 games. I think this is the move you make if you're desperate for a running back, is you trade for Bucky Irving before he breaks out and becomes the lead back for Tampa.
I love that.
And Jamie, it's terrific. You're saying buy low on Brian Thomas Jr., Jamie.
As cheap as he'll ever be. Coming off still a productive game with Mac Jones, which was nice to see. Now you have another receiver hurt for the Jaguars in Gabe Davis. There is the outside chance that Trevor Lawrence does return. I don't think that's something you want to count on, but you might be able to hope for, and just looking at what the value is right now for him, I mean, you can get him for nothing. There are going to be some people that cut Brian Thomas, just with some bye week constraints and looking at their rosters in 10-team leagues more so than anything else. But if you can get him cheap, why not? Take a chance on a guy that just had one of his more productive games, certainly his best game with Mac Jones, and at this point, feature that kid as much as possible.
So you're saying buy low on Brian Thomas. You don't expect necessarily Trevor Lawrence to come back?
Right. That's interesting.
I don't. But again, this is going to be as cheap as you can possibly find somebody that still has top 20 upside based on his skill set and opportunity, and a team that's going to be throwing the ball every fourth quarter because they're going to be chasing points.
I mean, I would buy on him on the hope that Trevor Lawrence does make a return.
That's something I think you hope for,
right? But
don't necessarily count on.
Yeah, I mean, if I knew that Trevor Lawrence wasn't coming back, I don't know if I'd trade for Brian Thomas Jr.
But I'm not saying you're giving up anything of significance for him.
I hope you're not.
You're giving up something that can maybe, like, I'm going to sell you your backup running back and something else.
A bench receiver.
Right. So I'll give you, you're the James Conner, and I'll give you Trey Benson and Elijah Moore or Trey Benson and Jerry Jeudy for Brian Thomas, one of those type of deals.
Okay. All right. Maybe I say yes to that if I'm going to the playoffs. Yeah, maybe.
Well, look, you try to take advantage of a team that's desperate this week because it's got players on a bye, and if you happen to be one of the lucky ones that doesn't, then you trade from your depth. Okay, let's talk about our favorite sell highs. Jamie, we'll go with you. We'll go to Anthony Richardson here. Is a sell high for you?
Look, he was amazing against the Jets, and obviously everybody's excited about him. We're going to talk about him as a waiver wire ad, as he should be. But you look at the matchup this week against Detroit, it's not going to be great for him, so I don't think you're going to get a great performance out of this. He still has his bye coming up in Week 14, so you're not going to have him in 2 weeks. So you're looking at a situation where, did we just get the best of Anthony Richardson? Look at the numbers here, 20 of 30, 272, and a touchdown. He ran for 2 scores. Everybody's been doing this against the Jets. Every single quarterback that has faced them recently, unless you're CJ Stroud, has had a monster performance against the Jets with their legs. I hope he's solved. I hope he's right. I hope everything about Anthony Richardson is moving forward. He's one of my favorite breakout candidates this year. But schedule plus bye week plus situation, if you can flip him for something great, do so right now.
And Dave, you're selling high on Tyreek Hill. Come on, big finish.
We're going to give people whiplash because I feel like for the last 2, maybe 3 weeks, we talked about Tyreek Hill as a great buy low. Maybe this is more for people that drafted Tyreek and lived through all the bad games with Tyreek. I'm not sure he's going to have many more great games like this one. He had a great game against Las Vegas. Both their starting cornerbacks went down in the game. He's had just 3 games with 8 or more targets since week 1. His longest reception since then is only 30 yards. We know that there's contingency downside for him between his wrist and his quarterback. And the schedule, it's not that tough, but only 2 teams that are bottom 10 or top 10, I guess I should say, in fantasy points allowed to the wide receiver position left on his schedule. So it's an okay schedule for Tyreek Hill. I don't think you should just get rid of him. You've got to turn him into like a top 5, top 8 type of player. This is your off ramp for Tyreek Hill right before the trade deadline. There's going to be teams that are desperate for wide receiver help this week and in week 14. Help him out, but get a good player in return. And I mean a really good player.
So who are you getting in return from?
I would try and get one of these underperforming running backs, like Kyron Williams is a name that came off the top of the dome. Maybe Kenneth Walker. Those are 2 guys that I would happily take for Tyreek Hill right now.
All right, yeah, maybe I'll revisit with Jamie a little Tyreek Hill for Breece Hall or something like that.
We'll Breece is another one I would take. I don't think you'll get that, but yes, that's an option.
I wouldn't do that because if you're going to trade Tyreek Hill, you should trade him for someone that, unless you're going to clinch the playoffs, trade him for someone that does not have a bye because Tyreek Hill has passed his bye, so you don't want to lose a week. All right, top 3 waiver wire priorities. Dave, why don't we start with you? Who are your top priorities?
I think Anthony Richardson is the number 1 waiver priority. There's a difference between calling him a sell high, and I don't disagree with Jamie's sentiment whatsoever. He's not a top 12 quarterback yet, but he could be. And I was really impressed with how he did against the Jets throwing the football. That's a big step for him. And there's a bunch of quarterbacks on bye this week. Getting Anthony Richardson should be an absolute priority. Will Dissly is second. And then it was a really close call for me between Elijah Moore, Christian Watson, Jonnu Smith. I'll take the safety valve with targets. That's Elijah Moore has had at least 8 targets each of his last 3 games. So I said a lot of names there. It's Richardson, it's Will Dissly, and it's Elijah Moore.
And Jamie, your top 3 priorities?
It's 2 tight ends. It's Will Dissly and Jonnu Smith. You're looking at what's going on with the bye weeks, right? So quarterback is tough to find. So Richardson, Drake May, they make a lot of sense. I actually like May slightly better than Richardson for this week, just given his matchup. When you look at the tight end position, though, so many studs, or at least must-start guys, are not available this week with the 6 teams on a bye. So to get Will Dissly and what he's done in his 4 of his last 5 games, at least 8 PPR points, but 2 of those spike games, 16 PPR points or more. And Jonnu Smith, basically same thing. 2 spike games in his last 5. Both have favorable matchups. You're seeing how they're working in their respective offenses. I love the setup for Will Dissly, so he's my favorite player to add this week. And then I'll take Christian Watts as the number 1 receiver. When this guy gets hot, he gets nuclear. And you're talking about a game where he just had 4 for 150 on 4 targets in a game where Jordan Love threw 17 times. If we see these numbers start to go up for this passing game, we said at the beginning of the season, I said at the beginning of the season, I'll go back to what I said. Jaden Reed has been the best Packers receiver so far. I thought Watson had the most upside of all these guys. If he hits it, he's going to be a top 20 wide receiver. And again, when he gets hot, he gets hot. So I like him slightly better than Elijah Moore.
All right, and my top 3 priorities, I don't know the order. Maybe you guys can help me out, but for me, it would be Bryce Young, Cooper Rush, Tommy DeVito. Let's have to figure out the order of those.
It's a good group.
Yeah.
Let's spend 6 minutes talking about it.
All right, well, you know what? Let's talk a little bit more about some better quarterbacks who are on the waiver wires. You do need to replace Josh Allen or Joe Burrow or Kirk Cousins, and we'll help you out when we come back on Fantasy Football Today. Well, Anthony Richardson scored 30 fantasy points in 6-point per passing touchdown leagues against the Jets in Week 11, but now he gets the Lions, who are 4th best against quarterbacks, have not allowed multiple touchdown passes to a quarterback yet this season. So how much do we like him? Let's take a look at quarterbacks and running backs on the waiver wire as we're back here on Fantasy Football Today, presented by BetMGM. Jamie, you want to take us through your list with Richardson, Drake May, Jameis Winston up top, and then number 4 is the guy who's on a bye, so there's some long-term planning as well. But take us through your waiver wire priorities at quarterback.
It's really just the first 2 that you want to look for this week, because Winston's going to struggle Thursday night against the Steelers. They just did a great job against Lamar Jackson, so I think Winston's going to be in trouble. He's had 2 good games. In 2 good matchups, he struggled against the Chargers. I think this is going to be another difficult matchup for him as well. But you're looking at Richardson, and the hope would be is that he builds off what he just did against the Jets, that he throws the ball with similar accuracy, that he runs to the same level, or at least can find the end zone running. But you said it, Adam, this is not an easy matchup against the Lions. So you want to pick up Richardson and stash him. You do not want to pick up Richardson and start him, which is why I think Drake May, if you're looking for a 1-week replacement option, is in a better spot. Taking on the Dolphins, it's a more favorable matchup. He's had more long-term success this season than Richardson. He's had more recent success than Richardson. 21 or more fantasy points in 3 of his last 5 healthy games. He's also going to run. And so I think that's something that you factor in also, that he may have just as much rushing upside. We don't think about that, but you look at the way that May's game logs have gone. He's got a 95-yard rushing game on his resume already in his rookie campaign. Richardson has not done that so far this season. So I don't think that there's that much difference in what these guys can do. Certainly the heights and the ceilings favor Richardson when he plays the way that he performed, but how often is he going to do that? Which is why I think he's a sell high candidate and not somebody that I think you want to say is a must-start quarterback against that fantastic Detroit defense.
Would you make the move to add Richardson off the waiver wire and then try and trade him? Would you prioritize him? Let's say I'm good at tight end, good at running back, good at wide receiver, but I know that the buys are coming. Would you prioritize Richardson with the idea being that you could trade him and get something in exchange for him?
Yeah, I mean, it's clearly something that you can do. You know, that's always a risky proposition if you need something someplace else that could help you. You know, so if you're talking about maybe getting Trey Benson's out there, you want to pick him up and say as a long-term stash candidate because he could be a league winner, or you want to take a second quarterback that you're never going to play because you already passed your bye. Let's say you have Kyler Murray, you don't want to pick up Anthony Richardson. Now, you get to week 13 and they face New England. That's a great matchup for Anthony Richardson. So he can have an opportunity to help you win that week if he comes out of this game playing strong enough and it wasn't just the Jets. Just don't fall for the Jets matchup. Every quarterback against the Jets is going to do well, as we've seen. And so I just hope that's not the reason why Richardson played the way he played.
Well, I really thought that he played well. I thought it was his best game as a pro, and that's really saying something compared to what he looked like at the beginning of the year. Not only did they call a lot of designed runs for Richardson, he handled pressure mostly well, still misfired at times, but for the most part, he looked like a developing NFL quarterback, and I'm excited about that. So he's number one for me. I originally originally had Winston over May. I still do, but I get where you're coming from. Certainly for this week, May over Winston does make some sense, but volume will be in Winston's favor. That's all the Browns can really do well these days. It's just pass, pass, pass. And so as long as he's going to throw a lot, he can fall into some decent production, even against the Steelers. So I'm going to go with Richardson first, and then I'll flip-flop what you had, Jamie. I'll take Winston second and May 3rd.
You know, Dave, I brought up on the podcast Will Levis, that they count that touchdown pass to Calvin Ridley, who's the ineligible man downfield, or legal formation, pardon me, was taken back. Then we're talking about 2 games in a row with more than 23 fantasy points against the Chargers and the Vikings. Obviously, look, if whatever it is, it didn't happen, didn't count.
Right.
But he's got Houston. Houston does not have a good pass defense right now. I don't know what's going on.
They're bottom 10 in the last 4 weeks and overall in the season. Bottom 10 in fantasy points allowed to wide receivers. Obviously, they're not great against quarterbacks. And the Titans just in general.
They're getting better.
They are going to get better.
5 interception game against Jared Goff, and then obviously playing Cooper Rush.
Right, and they'll get Will Anderson back, and that'll help too. I like the schedule for Tennessee, and I think that their game script is going to be pretty much locked in too. So we'll see a lot of volume, and certainly Will Levis is not afraid to throw that ball 30-plus yards downfield. I still would rather have Richardson, Winston, May ahead of Will Levis.
But Levis is 16% rostered, so check him out in Superflex and 2 quarterback leagues. He's in the column, Adam. I just didn't add him to the graphic.
Sure. So Tommy DeVito is now our newest starting quarterback. Bryce Young is keeping the job, at least for this week. Gardner Minshew, same thing for him. And then there is Cooper Rush. So if you were going to put in, how much of a bit, like I have a league, we have a Superflex league. I don't know if I want to tell everybody how much fab I put on Tommy DeVito because Jamie's in the league with me, but it wasn't that much because I don't think he's going to be that good.
Well,
but he is a quarterback.
I'll give you a real life example, Adam. I mean, in our dynasty league, which it's even tougher to find quarterbacks. I spent $11 of $100. Well, I don't even know how I left on Mac Jones. Just because I was trying to find somebody who can get me through a week in a couple of weeks. Just to see what was going to happen there. So Tommy DeVito is in a better standing than Mac Jones because of what he accomplished last year. He's got better talent around him this year, just with Malik Neighbors alone.
Better line too.
Five games last year that he started, 17 or more fantasy points in 3 of them. And so is he good? No. Is he better than Daniel Jones? Most likely not. But he's going to get an opportunity to prove himself. And it really shows that, what direction the Giants are trying to go here because they didn't go to Drew Lock. They want to see if maybe DeVito could be their number 2 guy next year while losing games. And so does DeVito give them the opportunity to still show them something and maybe not win the game so they don't ruin their draft status for 2025? But in any event, I think what DeVito proved last year, what he has a chance to do this year, he's not a bad option in Superflex or 2 quarterback leagues. When you're talking about 6 teams on a bye this week, bye week, the situation that we're coming up in week 14, you may need a player like this.
All right, and we'll move on to running backs here. DeVito, though, he just has an amazing schedule beginning this week with the Buccaneers, who allow the most fantasy points to quarterbacks. So going to the running backs now, and it's tough. I mean, it's tough. It's been tough for weeks to find a running back that's going to come in off the waiver wire and contribute, except last week when we had Audric Estime. Oh, fooled you. Anywho, here are maybe top running backs. Dave, what do you think about this list? Johnson, Benson, Abdullah. What do you think?
It makes me almost want to go back to talking about DeVito and Cooper Rush and Bryce Young. Like, that's how bad this is. But I get why we want these running backs on our fantasy team. And I would throw Blake Corum on this list as well, but not toward the top. Roshan makes sense, either him or Amir Abdullah at the top of the list, because these are guys who are going to play. And in the case of Abdullah, if there's no Zamir White, if there's no Alexander Madison, he's going to be the lead running back for the Las Vegas Raiders. So if you're really desperate for a running back, maybe your starter's on bye in week 12, Abdullah is probably the best guy you can get. The problem is that he might also be one of the worst guys. You might be cutting him by Saturday if Alexander Madison and or Zamir White are back on the practice field for the Raiders. So in that situation, if you want to take something that's a little bit more of a safety valve, a sure thing, that's Roshan Johnson. And that's my guess why you have Roshan at the top of your list, is because he's playing a decent amount for Chicago. He's in a passing downs role. He normally works at the goal line. He does that a little bit more than DeAndre Swift. Certainly he did last week. And this is a Chicago offense that needs to get better running the football. Their offensive line's getting stronger. And Roshan, to me, makes sense as somebody who might be able to get you 6 to 10 non-PPR fantasy points provided that he scores.
So all these guys are going to play. That's the one thing about it is they're all been getting touches lately. You know, Cam Akers, for example, 12 total touches each of his last 2 weeks. Jerome Ford's coming off a 4-catch game. Gus Edwards, you know what he's been able to accomplish the last 2 weeks. 6 carries last week, the game before 10 carries, so he's going to get some chances to touch the ball. So all these guys are going to have some semblance of a role. To whatever degree you think they're going to help you, that remains to, I think, what your fantasy team needs. Amir Abdullah should have the chance for the most work, but we don't know exactly what's going to happen with Madison, with White. You prefer Madison to be the one that's out as opposed to, I'm sorry, you prefer Zamir White to be the one. No, you prefer Madison to be the one that's out.
I want them both out.
Well, if you're Abdullah and you're looking at one of them does return, you'd rather be Zamir White than Madison because at least then you know Abdullah will be in that passing downs role. So we'll see what they do with Dylan Lobby. Also, he got 1 carry on the season and he fumbled that 1 carry week 6 against Pittsburgh. So we'll see how this all sort of works together. But Roshan, in terms of not just the potential to help you, there's also some lottery ticket appeal there. Trey Benson's got the most lottery ticket appeal of these guys, and he's been getting a lot of work the last 2 games prior to their bye week. But Roshan played a season high in snaps in week 11. DeAndre Swift played the second lowest amount of snaps of the season so far, lowest since week 3. So with a coordinator change, do we see maybe a little bit of a role adjustment for both of these guys? That's why Roshan's just slightly ahead of Trey Benson. But if you're looking and you don't need anybody, Trey Benson should be the one that you add first.
I don't mind that one bit, but if I've got Kyron Williams, I need Blake Corum on my bench. If I've got Devon Achane, I need Jalen Wright on my bench. I want to have those handcuffs ready to go. This is the time to start playoff-proofing your fantasy roster so that you can make a run without having to panic and go after the waiver wire and get somebody like Amir Abdullah to go and fill in a spot for a week.
Not sure I agree with the Jalen Wright take, though, because it's not like Mostert is, I mean, I feel like Mostert is the handcuff to Achane, not Wright.
I think we will see both of those guys play, and just based on just where they're at as far as talent and speed in their careers, I think Wright is ahead of Mostert, and he's been playing ahead of Mostert.
And Mostert's had fumbling problems.
And he's got a hip injury.
If you happen to see Jalen Warren on your waiver wire, he is 70% rostered. He would definitely be someone to get. He's scored 7.9 or more PPR fantasy points in 4 straight games. Doesn't give you a big game, but you'll take 8 PPR fantasy points. And then I guess I have to throw one more player out I didn't even think about would be Zamir White. Because you can't get Madison. He's rostered in almost 90% of leagues. There's a possibility that Zamir White, look, he's not great. He's going up against a really good run defense, but he's about 30% rostered. If he's in and Madison is out, then that might be someone who could get in the end zone or something like that.
Yep.
All right. Okay, that's it for. What are we doing? What are we doing with Audric Estime before we go to break?
I think you're holding him, based on what Sean Payton said about, it's going to be a week-to-week thing with his running backs. I like the fact that he's finally involved in the passing game. So 3 targets, 3 catches, only got 9 yards on it. But at least you know that they're going to give him some opportunities to maybe do that. Look, 2 weeks ago, biggest game of the season for them at that point, taking on Kansas City in Kansas City, gave him an opportunity to lead the team in touches, trying to kill the clock at the end of the game. They kicked that field goal. He's one of the heroes that you're celebrating. And so we're coming off that game. They go back to Javonte Williams against the Falcons. Who knows what they're going to do moving forward? At least you see that those 2 guys will get the touches right now as opposed to Jaleel McLaughlin. He's going to be 3rd on the depth chart. So if you need to drop him, like we talked on the podcast today, Adam, you're going to have some tough calls about maybe dropping a Tyler Algier, a Ray Davis, a Braylon Allen, a Jordan Mason, because 6 teams on a bye. These are handcuffs at this point, especially the guys that are not playing with Allen, Algier, and Davis. Mm-hmm. You might have to be in the same situation with Audric Estime, but you just spent a lot of fab on him most likely. Let's just see it play out for another week or 2. It's still a good matchup against the Raiders where both running backs can have success. So I may be using Estime as a flex this week.
All right, we are missing a lot of good wide receivers this week. We've got Kyle Pitts, Taysom Hill, and Evan Ingram on a bye. So who can you pick up off the waiver wire to help out at wide receiver and tight end? We'll tell you after this. Back here on Fantasy Football Today, presented by BetMGM. Let's take a look at the best available wide receivers and tight ends. But before we do that, some rapid fire questions for you. All right, you can take a look at the wide receivers. We can do both. We can walk and chew gum. DeAndre Hopkins, would you drop DeAndre Hopkins for Christian Watson?
Yes.
I think as long as, I think I would, even if I was starting DeAndre Hopkins.
Would you drop Jalen Waddle for Elijah Moore?
I would definitely. I would have dropped Waddle weeks ago, yeah.
Oh, man, that's so sad. Would you drop Michael Pittman for Demario Douglas?
Yes.
That one's closer. I would definitely drop him for Watson or Moore. I might hold on to Pittman. He and Douglas are kind of the same guy.
Would you drop Kyle Pitts for Jonnu Smith?
Yeah, if I need a tight end this week especially.
All right, now let's talk about this list here. This beautiful list. Jamie, Christian Watson leads the way. If Jerry Jeudy were available, where would he be on this list?
Number one. You look at what he's done in the 3 games with Jameis Winston, 12.5 PPR points or more, and the number has increased every week. 12.5 to 14 plus to 21 plus. Scored a touchdown. All the Browns receivers are basically getting 8+ targets on a weekly basis. So with the way that Jameis is performing, even in some of these tough games, remember, we saw the Chargers game, which I think is on par to the Steelers game that he's about to face, and he's got brutal schedule coming up. The receivers still put up decent numbers, even though Jameis struggled. So I think that's the type of game that you'll get from him moving forward. Where in PPR, these wide receivers, not all of them on a weekly basis. We saw Tillman struggle, for example, last week against the Saints. So one guy's probably going to get left out as we move along here each week. But the way that he's giving them chances to succeed, they should all be added, and Jerry Jeudy would be number one.
So looking at Christian Watson, who was number one on the list because Jerry Jeudy's rostered in too many leagues, is he like Anthony Richardson, where you're saying, I don't want to start him this week, I want to see where this goes? Or is he like, let's start Christian Watson this week?
I think it really depends on the makeup of your team. If you need a receiver with some high-end upside, and we saw what he's capable of just in this past game against Chicago. He had a huge game without even scoring a touchdown and without getting a ton of targets. If you need that for your lineup, and you might want that for your lineup if you've got receivers on bye, then yeah, he's going in. And this is the type of receiver that Christian Watson is. But in saying that, we also have to look at what he's done previously. And there's been a bunch of games this year where he hasn't even played more. He's had a route run rate of like somewhere between 40 and 60%. And you're looking for something higher than that. And when he's had that limited role, the numbers are limited. And so there's risk with Christian Watson, but the upside is great. And I think Jordan Love's going to have to throw more than 17 times against San Francisco. That 49ers defense, they might get Charvarius Ward back in their secondary. They might not have Nick Bosa rushing the quarterback. When they don't have Bosa, it is a different defense to throw against. And that does add some appeal to Christian Watson. But just like the Browns, the Packers have a different number one receiver, it seems like, every single week. And this past week, Romeo Doubs did nothing. Would it shock you if Romeo Doubs led the team in targets, catches, and yards this week against San Francisco? It's possible. The Packers don't have that number one wide receiver.
So the thing that I like about Watson is you go back to the 2 previous games prior to their bye week, and it was disastrous for Jordan Love. He had the groin injury 2 games prior to the bye week against Jacksonville. 7 targets in that game for Christian Watson. They were trying to get him going in that game. Come back in the rain game against Detroit. Love is clearly not 100%. 6 targets in that game. He's among the target leader in both of those games for the Packers. Might have led them in targets in both of those games. So clearly they're trying to make a concerted effort to get him to the level of where he's capable of being. And again, Jaden Reed is awesome. Romeo Doubs has been fantastic, at least in those 2 games that we saw coming back post-suspension. Dontavian Wicks has a chance to be special. Christian Watson is different from all of them. When he is on his game and performing the way that he's capable of performing, the other guys cannot touch him. So when he gets those chances, and if he delivers in those chances, 4 targets and 17 passes for Jordan Love. Imagine if he's throwing the ball 30 plus times and he continues to get that target share. So yes, it's risky because we've seen what he's become. We know that he's injury prone, but if he hits, we saw it in his rookie campaign, that 3 or 4 game stretch with Aaron Rodgers. We saw it before he had the last hamstring strain last year when Jordan Love was on fire. So was Christian Watson in those 2 games. Hopefully he stays healthy. Hopefully he gets the targets. He could be a huge difference maker for fantasy managers down stretch.
Do you think Elijah Moore gets 8 or more targets against the Steelers?
Yeah, I mean, he's gotten 8 targets in each of his last 3 games. He's given you at least 16.5 full PPR points in 2 of his last 3, and he's not anywhere near as exciting as Christian Watson. I don't think he's likely to ever be the number one wide receiver for any NFL team, much less these Cleveland Browns. This is a volume play. You look at Jameis Winston, and you see how often he's throwing the ball. I think at least 40 pass attempts in 2 of his last 3 games, maybe in all 3 of those games, but they're throwing it a ton. They can't run the ball worth a darn. And so with that in mind, Elijah Mitchell is their slot receiver. He's going to get a lot of short area targets, but he gets a couple of downfield throws too, like the touchdown that he had last week. I think he's a little safer, especially in full PPR compared to Christian Watson. If we're talking half PPR, non-PPR, then yes, you can make the case for Watson. Just his upside makes him more worth it over somebody like Elijah Moore. But in full PPR, a lot of our leagues play in full PPR. I think Elijah Moore is just the safer guy to go to.
Let's take a look at the tight ends now with, again, some key tight ends on bye, including Taysom Hill, who scored 40 fantasy points last week. But Jamie is loving Will Dissly. Jonnu Smith is second. Is there a big gap between Disley's, Jonnu, and the rest?
Yes. I just think based on what you've seen from them, I do think Cole Kmet is worth, looking at. Dave talked about this going into last week that the coordinator change should help him, and it did. He played a season high snaps, 97% of the snaps. You just didn't see the targets and the chances that I think we're looking for some of these tight ends, like we're getting from Disley, like we're getting from Jonnu Smith. So I think if Kmet gets that 6 target range, then he has a chance to be pretty successful, especially in a matchup this week against Minnesota. The schedule after that is pretty brutal, but I do like the setup for him this week as a low-end starter, especially with the 6 teams on a bye. But when you look at Disley, you look at Jonnu Smith, you're just seeing a little bit of separation for not only what they're doing at the position, also what they're doing on their respective teams. Disley, we know 2 games ago when Justin Herbert, I think, threw 18 passes, 6 of them went to Disley. You saw the big play against Cincinnati. It's a great matchup against Baltimore. It's a great schedule coming up, and the way Justin Herbert's playing right now, you want pieces of this offense. And in the case of Jonnu Smith, we're talking about dropping Jalen Waddle. Why? Because Jonnu Smith has become such a significant factor for Tua Tagovailoa and just had a monstrous game with 6 catches, 101 yards, and 2 touchdowns against Las Vegas. So I don't really worry about the New England game. By the way, it's a revenge game for him as well. So I do think that Jonnu Smith has an opportunity to be a starting fantasy caliber tight end. And Adam, when you look at the column, we talked about this on the podcast as well, the guys that are in the shallower leagues, the Dallas Goederts, the Zach Ertz, Hunter Henry, those type of guys. This is where these guys are living right now in terms of Will Disley and Jonnu Smith. And when you go case by case, you can make a case that both of these guys are in better spots than some of these other tight ends. So they do have the chance to be number 1 fantasy options going into the week, and hopefully they come out of the week playing at the same level.
And I would just want to make it clear, Will Disley isn't doing anything special when he's running his routes. He's not juking defenders. In fact, a lot of his routes are pretty simple. He's just somehow staying open because defenses aren't covering him tightly because the Chargers have so many other playmakers on the field. They're worried about Quentin Johnson's speed, Lad McConkey's route running, and Justin Herbert is finding him and locating him and hitting him. Herbert is the key to Will Disley. He has a 23.8% or higher target per route run rate in 5 of his last 6 games. In other words, he's getting a lot of targets. And think about who the offensive coordinator is for the Chargers. It's Greg Roman, came up with the Ravens, used tight end a ton there. Ever since the bye, Will Disley's been a factor. He's absolutely worth getting and making your priority if you need a tight end this week and beyond.
Okay, and then if you miss out on all of those guys and you're in deeper leagues, you do have some decent options with Jatavian Sanders, who's been, pretty good lately, and now gets the Chiefs, who are pretty bad against tight ends, although I guess mostly against good tight ends, good fantasy tight ends. Theo Johnson has a great matchup. Luke Schoonmaker had 10 targets yesterday.
That's who I'd go after. And it might just be a 1-week thing. And it's obviously provided that Jake Ferguson, he was concussed on Monday and that he doesn't play. But the Commanders have given up a ton of fantasy points lately to tight ends. I think Schoonmaker, who had double-digit targets on Monday, could end up being the 3rd best tight end that you could pick up off the waiver wire. And I'm not sure everybody's going to target him. So you might be able to make him your 3rd or 4th claim, couple of fab bucks, maybe even wait till Thursday to get him if you're in a smaller league. He's somebody who I think could be a decent tight end for week 12 only.
All right, last thing I want to say is DSTs. We don't talk a ton about DSTs on this show, but we love the Commanders this week. Tampa Bay. Jamie's got the Bears in his column. And I've already done waivers for all of my leagues. I've got a lot of bids in, or small bids, maybe $0, whatever, claim the Cardinals.
Yes.
They're playing pretty well. They're barely rostered, 13% rostered. And the Seahawks are an okay matchup. So if you are desperate and you need a DST, don't overlook the Cardinals. All right.
Good job.
Who has more? Who has more DSTs? Now, who has more is coming up next. And no DST talk in that segment. We'll be right back on Fantasy Football Today. We are back here on Fantasy Football Today, presented by BetMGM, and it is time for America's 8th favorite fantasy football game show. It is time for Who Has More? Here's how the game works. I get frustrated spending 30 minutes on Monday night trying to come up with good questions. Dave and Jamie just answer them, and I never feel like they are good enough. But we're not America's 8th favorite fantasy football game show for no reason. Here we go. Who has more passing yards in his last 3 games? Joe Burrow or Jameis Winston?
I'll say Winston.
I'll say Burrow.
I'll say Jamie is right. Jamie gets a 1-0 win. Joe Burrow 1,035 yards. Jameis Winston, 964 yards in their last 3 games. That's
Nice.
1 and 2.
Well, I'll tell you right now, Jameis is going to have more in week 12.
That's true.
Yeah.
Well, we hope.
He's 250 yards against the Steelers, over under.
Under.
Over.
All right. Next up, who has more? This is an oddly worded one. Who has more running backs averaging 20 or more PPR fantasy points per game? 2024 or the previous 3 seasons combined?
I'll play the odds and say the previous 3 seasons combined.
I'll take the other side.
All right, I appreciate you being bold, Jamie, but it is the previous 3 seasons combined. 7 from 21 to 23, but 4 this year. That's a lot. That's a lot. It's a really good year for these high-end running backs. See if I can name 3 of them. Mixon, Henry, Barkley, Kamara. There you go. Those are the 4. Who has more receiving yards? Speaking of Kamara, Jalen Waddle or Alvin Kamara? Who has more receiving yards?
Kamara.
I think it's Kamara.
You're both right. You guys are great at this. Jalen Waddle has 404 receiving. Hey, don't do that. And you know what? Not only did you mock my laugh, you looked at Dave. Like you gave this like,
Well, Dave
see
was
how
laughing.
great I am?
I'm laughing at you mocking him.
All right, you guys both get that one, so we're tied still. Who has more completions of 30 or more air yards? Kyler Murray or Josh Allen?
Kyler.
The knee-jerk answer is Josh Allen.
Is that what you're giving,
Yeah,
Dave?
that's what I'm giving you.
That's really what, that's all you do is give the knee-jerk answer? That's your thing now?
I'm a jerk with 2 knees.
You are right.
See, that was a sincere laugh.
My thing was funnier. It's Josh Allen, and not only is it Josh Allen, it's Josh Allen 5-1. Kyler Murray has 1 completion of 30 or more air yards. You think he's a little overrated coming off a big game against the stinky Jets?
He did play the Jets, but you know what, though? I think you buy into what this offense is looking like, what this team is looking like, what the matchup's like against Seattle. Like, yeah, Kyler Murray's got top 5 upside this week.
I agree, and I think the best of Marvin Harrison is to come. I think they've finally figured out how to use him properly. He's running. I saw this from Jacob Gibbs on social media that he's running more horizontal breaking routes instead of downfield routes, and that's just going to open him up even more. That's what he's best at. So I think Marvin Harrison. Speaking of buy lows, maybe somebody to go after and trade for while his value is still relatively cheap.
Who has more completion? So that was actually sorry, skipped one. Who has more receptions of 20 or more yards?
Okay.
Justin Jefferson or the Tennessee Titans?
The Titans.
I think it's Jefferson.
It's the Titans. Jamie is tied again. The Titans have 7 more, but I think they have the fewest or among the fewest. Jefferson leads the NFL with 17 catches of 20 or more yards. Who has more completions of 20 or more yards? Josh Allen or Jared Goff?
Goff.
Yeah, I want to say Goff for that one too.
Oh, that's adorable that you guys want to say Goff, but you're wrong. It's Josh Allen, 39 to 38. I think they're 1 and 2 completions of 20 or more. I mean, that's great. That's shocking to me that Josh Allen has 39 completions of 20 or more yards with the kind of junk receiving core that he's had this year.
Yeah, that's not nice. Don't say that about Khalil Shakir. And
he's not a 20-yard guy, you know?
No, but he definitely makes a bunch of catch and run plays. How many 20-yard receptions does he have?
I will look it up while we do our next one.
All right, is this our last one, or is this just the next one?
2 more.
2 more.
Two more.
Got it.
Who has more receiving yards in his last 3 games? Travis Kelce or Jonnu Smith?
I think it's Jonnu.
Last 3 games? Mm-hmm. I'm going to go Kelsey.
It is Jonnu Smith.
Kelsey had a dud in week 11.
Right, but Jonnu had like a 4 for 30 game in there somewhere.
Yeah, that's still better than what Kelsey gave you.
Right. I got Dave up by 1 unofficially.
No,
Jamie,
that's officially it. The judges right here
Okay.
are saying so, yeah.
I'm going to make Dave answer this one first.
Sure.
Who has more moons, Jupiter or Saturn?
I think it's Jupiter.
I'll say Saturn just for the difference.
Wait, I forget because I had it wrong the first time.
It's Jupiter.
Is it Jupiter?
Think so.
I need the producer to help me out here. I think it is Jupiter. Because I got it's wait, what did
And
you
that's
say?
where you're
Jamie?
going to get more stupider.
What did you say, Jamie?
I said Saturn just to be different.
Oh, Dave wins.
Saturn has the rings, Jupiter has the moons.
Yep.
And snails have lots of teeth.
And we have no time. Oh, shucks.
All right, we're going to take a break. When we come back, I'll tell you how many 20-yard receptions Khalil Shakir has, and we'll answer more of your questions. More we haven't answered any. So, yeah, we'll answer some of your questions when we come back on Fantasy Football Today. Welcome back to Fantasy Football Today, presented by BetMGM, the sportsbook born in Vegas. First question is from Caleb Skaggs. What do you think about holding and playing the Eagles DST over the popular waiver wire DSTs this week? What do you guys think about Philadelphia at the Rams Sunday night?
It's not a bad move, if you're in a good spot with your playoff contention. You want to make sure you have one of the better units moving forward. And look, Stafford's been taking sacks lately. The offensive line's still a work in progress, and we know he can be turnover prone at times. So it's not awful, but if I can get my hands on the Commanders, the Bucks this week, I like them slightly better than the Eagles, but the Eagles are still a top 10 unit.
You might want a 2-week solution because after they play the Rams this week, they take on the Ravens. After that, Philadelphia is good to go rest of the season. That's your stud DST unit. If you can get the Commanders, their next 2 games, Dallas, Tennessee, good matchups for that Washington defense.
And by the way, Khalil Shakir has 7 catches of 20 or more yards. Next question.
I texted you that.
Yeah, I read it. But I also saw it independently, so I didn't feel like I had to give you any credit. So just letting you know how I'm operating today, Dave. And Kevin wants to know if he can drop Rico Dowdle.
He's droppable. I think if you saw him on the waiver wire comparatively to Roshan Johnson and Trey Benson and some of these guys that we said at the top of the list, you'd probably want to take a chance on him just with the opportunity to see what he can do if he can get back on track. But clearly this Cowboys offense is a disaster.
I would use the "you sure about that" meme because he's got Washington, the Giants, Cincinnati, Carolina. Those are his next few games. I know the offensive line could be a mess. If the offensive line is okay, I think Rico Dowdle is worth at least rostering, if not flexing.
I am sitting him this week for Romo Dunze in a PPR league, but I would not drop Rico Dowdle. And that's not a final decision, by the way. Bobby wants to know, is it better to stash high-end handcuffs like Corum, Wright, Charbonnet, or DSTs that have great playoff schedules?
Probably comes down to what your team looks like and what your scoring is. I'm in one league where DST scoring is through the roof, so I might lean that way just based on how the league goes. But clearly, look, if as Dave said, Kyrie Williams goes down, you're going to want Blake Corum. Something happens to Devon Achane, you're going to want Jalen Wright. We've seen what Zach Charbonnet could do in 2 games this year without Kenneth Walker. So these guys could be league winners as well. Maybe you want to just kind of, take 1 and 1. Take a second defense that has a good schedule and take a running back that could be a league winner like Blake Corum.
I don't mind carrying 2 DSTs if you map out which one you'll use each week during the fantasy playoffs. But I will also tell you that you can always find a DST on the waiver wire, even in the fantasy playoffs. You cannot find running backs who get a golden opportunity to be a lead back for their team without paying a pretty penny for it off the waiver wire. I'd rather have the running backs.
Jason wants to know if he should drop Audric Estime for Javonte Williams or Roshan Johnson in half.
I'd rather have Javonte right now, just based on what we saw. So, yes, I would do that.
Plus, the matchup against Las Vegas this week is good.
Should we just stream? Last one here from Philly sports fan. What are you doing? Should we just stream tight end rest of season, or is there a clear favorite? I lost by less than 1 point this week. Thank you, Kraft.
Oh,
I mean, if you can get Disley or Jonnu, they're past their bye weeks, and you see what they're becoming in their offenses. So those are guys you can probably stream this week and carry rest of season. But, I don't want to, trust Luke Schoonmaker or Jatavion Sanders or Theo Johnson rest of the way.
And I also don't want to necessarily trust the Ertz, Goddard, Hunter Henry contingent of tight ends. So you're probably still going to stream, but getting somebody that you're comfortable with like Disley does make sense.
You want to do the outro? I'll do it. Fine. That's it for Fantasy Football. Check out the podcast, Fantasy Football Today, anywhere you listen to podcasts. For Dave, Richard, and Jamie Pittsburgh, I am Adam Azer. Have a great day, everybody. Thanks for watching.